Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for today's program. We're going to be talking about a topic that a lot of churches, a lot of Christian leaders, and even a lot of Christians in general don't like to talk about, and that is the assault on Christian values that we're seeing coming from government, from cultural institutions. In other words, Christianity is under attack, and it's a negative topic. A lot of people don't like to talk about it. In fact, if you look at the teaching and preaching topics of some of the biggest mega churches in our culture in our country, they don't even tackle this subject. They don't even acknowledge that Christianity and the Christian value system is under attack. It's as if they totally are in denial of the assault on Christianity that is taking place before our very eyes. They don't want to wade into that controversial, divisive topic, but we can't ignore it. We have to have our eyes wide open. We have to look at what's taking place, and we have to deal with what's taking place from a Christian perspective. And what is taking place is our culture in our country, United States, or more generally the Western culture that we live in, which the United States is a part, the European, traditional Judeo-Christian European and American culture, we are under assault by secular, humanistic, immoral forces. The people who are attacking us, they don't always realize that they are attacking Christianity. In fact, a lot of them think, well, there's no problem. We're not attacking anybody. They're pushing, for example, the LGBTQ agenda, all these sexually immoral, perverted practices, and they want you to celebrate that. And as Christians, we cannot celebrate that because that is something God hates. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. Even Christians and even pastors and a lot of churches don't like to hear that God hates sin. And when you start saying, no, I'm against trans athletes in high school women's track. When you say that, because God hates that sin, you are labeled a bigot, you're a divider, you are negative, you're sowing division, and they blame you for being opposed to sin. And so a lot of churches and a lot of Christian leaders, they just don't want to deal with that. I'm not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about the cultural attack on Christianity. We're not going to talk about the assault of Christian values by the secular government. We're not going to talk about how our political leaders are marginalizing our Christian influence. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about things that are non-divisive, non-controversial. And so what happens is you essentially have churches who are turning themselves into more or less self-help techniques and tips, and you don't get the Bible. You don't get that sharp edge on truth that we need. We need that sharp edge. Now, the Bible convicts everyone of all of their sins. It is not a respecter of persons in respect to convicting people of sins. That's why it's so inconceivable for me, for example, when you have these high-profile Christian leaders like, for example, a Ravi Zacharias, a famous Christian apologist who died last year. And after he died, it was found out that he had been visiting these spas, these health spas, and committing immoral acts with some of the people in there, and all kinds of immoral things. And you say, well, wait, here is a leader who is explaining Christianity to people all over the world, has a huge ministry, highly respected. He's living a hypocritical life. How can that be? Because he was compartmentalizing his life, and he was not being convicted by the words he was preaching. The Bible convicts people of their sins, and it's an equal opportunity convictor of sin. So the healthy Christian church has a pastor who is preaching everything the Bible preaches and teaches everything the Bible teaches. And if that upsets somebody, so be it. If that upsets a lot of people, so be it. When you preach a sermon that says that marriage is between a man and a woman only, exclusively, that's going to upset a lot of people in our culture. Well, so be it. That's the way it is. We cannot get around the fact that our Christian faith is controversial to people who are in rebellion with God. Now, part of being a Christian is that you have been humbled and your heart has been broken and you are confessing and repenting of your sins. And if you did support those sins before, you no longer support those sins. You are against those sins. And you are honest and you are truthful and you tell the truth about those sins. And if you lose all your friends, you lose all your friends, but you're faithful to one God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And so you have to preach the truth. And so in the midst of our Antichrist culture, we have to preach the truth. And one of the things that we are to preach is to how to deal with a culture that is now in decline and is in rebellion against God. Now, some people might say, well, wait. Our culture is in decline. We're the leading culture in the world. We have the strongest economy. We're the envy of most nations in the world. How do you say that we're in decline? We are in moral decline. That's putting it mildly. We are in moral free fall. We are falling. That doesn't mean that we still aren't a leading nation, but it means that we are in decline, that we are falling, failing to live up to the standards that got us here. The character and the virtues that got us to where we are in the world today, the kinds of virtues and characters that the Judeo-Christian ethic teaches, these are all under assault today. Having to explain the difference between a man and a woman and to actually argue that there are important differences and that you can't have boys running in women's track in high school, having to actually engage in that discussion shows you how far our culture has fallen. And as Christians, we need to enter those conversations and we need to not be afraid that we might stir up controversy. There are so many Christians who are just so nice and so kind that they would never, ever want to get into a controversial discussion about the so-called trans women in women's sports in high school, because that would be so alienating. That would make people not like them, and they're so nice and kind. No, we have to enter into those discussions, and we have to say, look, it is not right for boys in high school to simply by declaration say, well, now I identify as women, so I'm going to run in the women's track and break all the records and take home all the rewards. That is not something that Christian parents should just allow to happen. But unfortunately, they are. They're just letting it happen. They don't want to step out and they don't want to stand out and take a stand and actually suffer for their Christian values. They would rather play it safe and say, well, I'm just going to not say anything. There are things I could say. It's kind of like that Christian artist at the Grammy Awards. One year I was watching the Grammy Awards, highlights of it, actually. And there was a rock group, AC/DC, and they were singing the song Highway to Hell, and they passed out these devil horns for the people in the audience. And all the people were getting up and celebrating this song called Highway to Hell. And there was a Christian artist who later, afterwards, said, Well, there were all kinds of negative things going through my head, which I better not say. Wait, no, you should say those things. Be bold, be brave, stand up for your Christian values. Don't keep it all in and saying, well, I better not say anything because it wouldn't be nice. No, speak your Christian truth. The people who are assaulting Christian values and trying to destroy the Judeo-Christian culture that we once lived in, they are bold. They are brave. They are speaking out publicly, and they're saying what they believe, and they're expressing their convictions. So if you don't do that as Christians, if you don't do that, then the only people talking are the people who are destroying our culture. And so we need to be willing to stand up as Christian parents, as Christian students, and say, no, the boys should not be running in the girls' track meets. The boys should not be taking home the trophies in women's track. That is wrong. That is sinful for a boy to say he identifies as a girl. It doesn't matter what he identifies. It doesn't matter what he feels. There is a biological reality that God created from the beginning, and that was he created them male and female. It says that in Genesis. Two categories, male, female. And there are biological markers that distinguish a male from a female. And if you're going to have women athletes and you're going to have women's athletics, then you have to keep the women's athletics exclusively women. And if you're going to have men, you're going to have to keep them separate from the women's athletes, or else you're going to have women kicked out of their own athletics by these so-called trans women. They're not really women. They're boys, young men who have decided they can get a lot of attention and get rewarded by simply declaring that they're a woman. This is insanity. And the fact that we even have to have that conversation, that's insanity. I mean, the fact that we even have to talk about this, the fact that I even have to talk about it, and that grown adults are allowing this kind of stuff to happen, this shows that our culture has already been defeated. And so as Christians, we have to not contribute to that decline and that defeat. We have to stand up and just be Christians and speak the Christian truth. And what that means is we're going to get even more persecuted. It requires a certain type of courage that unfortunately our churches are not teaching our Christian people to have at this time. You don't teach people how to stand up to a pagan culture and to stand strong in Christian values in church. You don't teach that if you're not even addressing it. And so the first step we have to have is churches and pastors admitting that we as Christians are being attacked and are under assault, and our value systems and our behaviors are being assaulted and opposed by the wider culture now. It's not a case anymore. It used to be, but because of our historical context, it used to be the Judeo-Christian values that we read about in the Bible and we hear about in church on Sunday. Those used to be out there in the culture. The institutions of our culture actually used to reinforce those biblical values. The government of our United States used to enforce and reinforce the values that you would hear on Sunday morning in church from the Bible, from the pulpit, the pastor preaching. So you could go almost everywhere in society and have your own Judeo-Christian values reinforced at one point in this nation. That is not the case anymore. Nowadays, almost everywhere you go in our culture, whether you're talking about in the national government, state level government, local government, public schools, public colleges and universities, whether you're talking about organizations like NFL sports, MLB, baseball, NBA, hockey, whatever, the professional sports are now anti-Christian in the sense that they actually promote values that are contrary to the Bible. You have, for example, at these Major League Baseball parks, you'll have the LGBTQ day, and they'll be wearing their little uniforms with some rainbow flag on the insignia on the side, and all the players will be promoting marriage equality or whatever. That is a big reality now in our world, and it's happening all over professional sports. So you sit down to watch a professional sporting event, and all of a sudden you'll get this LGBTQ propaganda contrary to the Christian worldview. That's an assault on your values. Now, a lot of churches don't want to talk about that. Why? Because it's controversial. Why? Because they don't want people to feel that they come to church and they hear something negative. But we're going to have to expose people to the harsh reality that as Christians, our values are being attacked every day, and we have to learn how to stand strong in our values. And at the same time, we have to learn how to actually promote our values from the Bible, promote the truth of God. When you think about it, we have been given a special task on this earth, and we've been here to disseminate truth to an unbelieving and lost world. The revelation that God gives us in the Bible, that is our message to give to the world. The moral code and the moral values of Christianity that God gives us in the Bible, those are values that it's our responsibility to perpetuate and promote those values. Because if people don't see those values, they don't hear about those values, and don't live those values, their lives are going to be ruined. You know, these people who are promoting all these sexually deviant, perverse, immoral lifestyles, and now our government's celebrating that and promoting all of that perversity, that will lead to destruction. So one of our callings is to stand up for the truth of God and promote the truth of God and talk to and convince people, hey, God's way is the best way. If you want to have a peaceful and successful and prosperous life, you have to follow the way of God. God knows the blueprint because he created the blueprint. He created the truths that will help a person live a life according to his will. And God's will is the best way to live. And so instead of these things being negative, they're actually positive. You know, when we promote that marriage is between a man and a woman exclusively and not anything else, that is a positive truth. We're not trying to put people down. We're trying to help them and lift them up. We're trying to save them from their own selves, self-destruction. And so when we want to order society according to God, we're actually doing everyone else a favor. They don't think of it that way. They don't, I want to do my own thing. But their own thing is going to lead to destruction. It's just what happened, for example, when churches stopped teaching about the sinfulness of homosexuality. They stopped talking about how wrong that is. What happened in the 70s? What happened in the early 80s? All of these communities all over, like San Francisco, New York City, all these gay communities started getting this strange illness called HIV, AIDS. And homosexual, immoral, perverted, deviant sexual behavior started bringing death to thousands and thousands and thousands. Now, that is the natural consequences of sin. But if the church is silent on that, I don't want to talk about that because that would be controversial. That would be divisive. People would be mad at me. Are they helping people by withholding the truth, or are they really hurting people. Of course, they're hurting people. And as Christians, we are hurting people when we're trying to be so nice and so polite that we don't tell them right from wrong. If you're a parent and you're not telling your teenage daughter or son what's right and what's wrong, you are actually hurting them. Now, they don't like it when you're telling them the truth. They may want to go to a party where everybody's drinking and getting drunk and getting high on drugs. And as a Christian responsible parent, you say, nope, can't go there. That's a bad place, bad environment. Those people are doing a bad thing. And your daughter or son might be, oh, I want to go there. You don't let me do anything fun. That is not fun when you have chemicals pumped into your veins, or whether you're taking chemicals that alter your state of consciousness and cause you to do dangerous, bad things. That is not a good thing. And so you have to explain to them. And if you explain to them correctly, and if you enforce the basic rules, they will thank you later on, and they will pass that along to their children. But if you're trying to be nice and kind, oh, I don't want to tell my teenager what to do, they won't like me if I do. You are doing them a disservice. You are really hurting them. You have to be willing to risk offending. That's what our churches need to do. Our churches and our pastors need to be willing to tell people, look, people, we are under attack right now. Our values are under attack. The Christian marriage institution is under attack. Christian singles are under attack by this paganized, sexually immoral culture. Our children in school are under attack. They're being brainwashed. They're being indoctrinated in the LGBTQ moral perversion. They're being taught to celebrate sin. They're being taught to follow false paths and false philosophies. They're being brainwashed. And so we need to not send our children to brainwash and indoctrination camps all day long. And we need to really look at the situation before us today that we're facing in our culture and say, yeah, we're in a war. We're in a cultural war. I know a lot of churches don't want to say that because that makes division. They don't want to say, you know, if you mention culture wars, then there's going to be Democrats and there's going to be Republicans. I've seen so many big mega churches, especially. They don't want to say anything bad about Democrats because they might offend Democrats. And they don't want to critique Republicans because they don't want to offend Republicans. So they just lump them all together. Well, you know, there's some bad on this side and there's some bad on that side. And I don't care what side you're. Wait a minute. Yeah, they're the bad Republicans, but it's nothing compared to what is being pumped out by the Democrats. The Democratic Party is the party of Satan. There's no question about it. They want to kill babies. They want to confuse the genders. They want to upend Judeo-Christian values. They want to destroy churches. They want to make it so difficult for people to go to church, and they want to impose on it so many rules and regulations that actually nobody actually goes to church. And that would be totally fine for most Democrats. They don't care about that. Because church, religion, as they call it, that's just a psychological thing anyway. And they don't see any deep transforming effect in church attendance anyway. And a lot of them don't even go to church, most of them. So we have to be willing to name names and say, look, the Biden Democratic administration is a disaster as far as cultural values is concerned. Yeah, we had problems with Republican presidents, but nothing like what we're seeing today. Nothing like we're seeing today as far as the promotion of anti-Christian values. We're being flooded. We're being flooded with filth and sin and evil and satanic rebellion against God's values. And as Christians, we need to be able to say that. We need to go to a place, a church, to hear that. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be nice. But by talking about it, we can say what we need to do to deal with it. We have to deal with it. We can't ignore it. We can't pretend it's not there. And the first step in dealing with it is acknowledging it. We are under assault in our culture. The Judeo-Christian framework upon which this culture was built, inconsistently, I might add, not perfectly, but there was a basic Judeo-Christian framework that is now crumbling before our very eyes. The foundation is being totally destroyed, and something else is being put in its place. It's a secular, socialist, immoral, ungodly philosophy of some sort. And we have to deal with that fact. We cannot live in denial. So if you're a Christian and you're trying to avoid talking about these things, I don't want to talk about the LGBTQ movement, and I don't want to talk about all these problems because that's so negative. You can't avoid it. You cannot avoid it. You can't be an ostrich sticking your head in the sand and saying, I just don't want to hear it. Or you can't plug your ears up and just talk real loud so that you don't hear all of the voices that are contrary to the Christian worldview. No, it's there. The public schools are brainwashing children into anti-Christian values. There's no question about it. You can't deny it. You can deal with it and figure out what you're going to do to combat it, but you can't deny it, because if you deny it, your children will be lost. Same way with our political leaders and all of the power grabs that are taking place since the COVID-19 epidemic. We are being manipulated and controlled. And as Christians, we have to learn how to deal with that. And churches need to address that, and they need to do so honestly. And they can't sugarcoat it. We have to acknowledge the fact that we are going to have to learn how to hang on to our beliefs and our behaviors and values in the midst of a hostile culture. We are now living in a hostile to Christianity culture. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we can then begin to prepare people for living in that environment. It's a new environment. Most of the history of our nation, we did not live in an openly hostile to Christianity environment. Oh yeah, sure, there were inconsistencies and misapplications of Christianity and all kinds of things, but today we are living in a hostile to God culture. And you are going to be bullied, you are going to be intimidated, you're going to be pressured into accepting sin and lies and errors and falsehoods, and you have to learn how to say no. And where are we going to learn how to say no if our churches are not teaching us? So I call upon all pastors and Christian leaders and people who have influence, hey, start training the body of Christ how to live in the midst of a hostile culture, because that's where we're at right now. Well, I hope that's been a helpful commentary. We'll see you back next week on another program. God bless.